Imagine waking up tomorrow and just suddenly realizing that you've been navigating your entire life looking through a tiny keyhole.
Oh, wow.
Right, like fully convinced that you are seeing the whole room. You're making all your decisions, forming judgments, building your relationship, all of it based on just this tiny fraction of the available data.
That is, I mean, that's a terrifying thought.
It really is. But, I mean, we tend to trust our perception implicitly, don't we? Like, we just believe that if we can see something, hear it, or touch it, we have a firm grip on reality.
Yeah, we do. And the problem with trusting our perception like that is that we rarely question the actual instruments we use to perceive. We just, we assume our biological hardware is giving us the complete picture.
Which brings us to our topic,
Mm-hmm.
because today we are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating, honestly quite provocative text from 2007 by a writer named Xue Feng.
Yeah, and this text, it argues that our baseline perception isn't just, slightly flawed. It asserts that we are completely ignoring a massive, fundamental layer of reality.
Because our primary instrument for seeing it is it's entirely blocked.
Exactly. Completely blocked.
And the mechanism blocking it, it isn't some grand cosmic mystery. According to this text, it's a highly specific set of everyday mental toxins, including this one very destructive emotion that, well, almost all of us experience on a daily basis.
We really do.
So for you listening, we're approaching this text as an immersive case study. The claims made here, they blend philosophy, psychology, and some very grand spiritual assertions.
Right. And just to be clear, our mission here is to unpack the mechanics of what the author is arguing. We're exploring the psychological causality he lays out just to see what this framework reveals about human nature.
Yeah, exactly. We're looking at it impartially. Think of it as like a system diagnostic for the human mind. We're checking if our hardware and software are actually taking in the full picture.
I love that analogy. And to understand what is supposedly blinding us, we first have to, map out the eyes the author claims we're actually using.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yep.
Because we're not just talking about the usual five senses here, right?
No, we're not. The text begins by asserting that humans operate with 6 perception systems, not 5. So you have the standard biological inputs.
Right, it's the stuff we know.
Exactly. Vision, hearing, olfaction, which is just smell, taste, and touch. But then we have the 6th one, spiritual perception.
Spiritual perception, okay. And the text draws a very sharp line between the consequences of losing these different systems, doesn't it?
It does, very sharp. So if you lose your physical senses, say, you lose your vision, you are blinded to the material world. You can no longer see what the author calls the infinitely colorful world. You lose access to the physical realm.
Right.
But the real pivot here is that if your spiritual perception is lost, you are blinded to the non-material world.
Which means what exactly? Like, practically speaking.
Well, the author defines that non-material blindness very specifically. Losing spiritual perception means losing the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, between truth and falsehood. Yeah. And it also means losing the ability to see what the text calls the greatest creator. But what's fascinating here is that this framework doesn't treat spiritual perception as some rare, mystical gift.
Like it's not just for the chosen few.
Exactly. It's not bestowed upon a lucky few. It describes it as a standard, pre-installed program that exists within every single human being.
It's framed as a universal baseline. So the author argues that the only difference between any two people is just the sensitivity of that internal program.
Right. It's just a matter of sensitivity.
The text actually lays out a whole hierarchy of human existence based entirely on how highly tuned this spiritual perception is. Like if the program is blunted, the text states a person inclines toward being an ignorant person.
Yeah, that's the lowest rung.
And then as sensitivity increases, a person moves up this ladder to the laity, then the mortal, the sage, and finally at the absolute peak, the celestial being.
And moving up that ladder, restoring that sensitivity, that's presented as the primary goal of self-cultivation here. It's how an individual reaches a higher order of life.
But to move up, you have to actually realize you're disconnected in the first place, which is tricky. I mean, I can think about physical senses like a standard cellular connection, right?
Sure.
It gets the job done for the material world. You can navigate a room, you can taste your food. But spiritual perception, in this framework, it operates more like a high-speed Wi-Fi network that contains the universe's source code.
I like that. The Wi-Fi analogy works perfectly.
Right. The signal is broadcasting everywhere, constantly. But if your internal receiver is jammed, you just don't pick it up. You stay at that ignorant person level without even realizing the network exists.
But that highlights the central dilemma of the text, really. Because the non-material world is invisible and the spiritual eye is invisible, you have to ask, how do you diagnose that blindness?
Exactly. You can't just close your eyes and, register the darkness.
Right. So the text provides a diagnostic tool. To know if your spiritual eyes are closed, you have to look for the dust. The author introduces this really ancient metaphor describing spiritual perception as a mirror.
A mirror that is already perfectly constructed, though. The framework insists you don't need to, build a new spiritual apparatus or somehow upgrade your mind. The mirror is already there.
Yeah, the hardware is fine.
The issue is simply that it is caked in dust. And the primary task of a human being is to diligently wipe that dust away.
And the author is quite methodical about how one actually performs this wiping. It's not just passive meditation. He points to specific toolkits.
Like what?
Well, the teachings of Jesus Christ and Buddha, for starters, he describes those as talismans. Furthermore, he identifies specific chapters from something called the Chanyuan corpus.
Right, the chapter's titled The Greatest Creator, Revelation, Wisdom, and Unconventional Thinking.
Exactly. He sees those as stepping stones to opening these eyes.
So we have to look at the cognitive mechanism of how a text or a teaching actually wipes a mind. Like when the author points to these teachings, he's prescribing a shift in focus.
How do you mean?
Well, if your mind is entirely consumed by the material world, your job, your physical comfort, your social status, your perception is anchored to those things.
Right, you're stuck in that loop.
Exactly. So reading and deeply contemplating texts about revelation or unconventional thinking, it forces the mind to break its material feedback loop. It demands that you engage with abstract, non-material concepts, which effectively scrapes away the superficial focus.
That scraping is necessary because that dust, it accumulates constantly through our daily interactions.
Everyday life.
Everyday life. And the text defines this dust as the impurity of the six senses. Now, in this specific context, the six senses are categorized as the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the mind itself.
The mind is included.
Yes, the mind is one of the senses here. And impurity occurs when there's an imbalance in how we manage the input and output of these channels.
The author describes it as a failure of filtration. It's the act of failing to see what you should see while staring intently at what you shouldn't. Failing to hear what you should hear while leaning in to listen to what you shouldn't. And probably most importantly, failing to contemplate what you should while obsessively overthinking things you shouldn't.
It's basically cognitive overload. This raises an important question about how the mind operates, because it operates very much like a social media algorithm.
Oh, totally.
It's a powerful, neutral processing engine that will just optimize for whatever data you feed it most often. If you don't actively curate the input from your eyes, your ears, and your thoughts,
the environment will just naturally pump unfiltered junk right into your system.
Exactly. Unfiltered junk. And the text relies on Buddha's teachings to categorize the nature of that junk. It asserts that this dust is caused by the 5 toxins.
Which brings us to a really crucial distinction the author makes regarding how these toxins are understood in modern culture. Because there's a common Chinese idiom about being addicted to the 5 toxins.
Yeah, and the text points out that colloquial culture has heavily distorted what those actually are.
Right, people usually interpret them as external physical vices.
Yeah.
Eating, drinking, whoring, gambling, smoking.
Or malicious behaviors.
Yeah.
Cheating, swindling, theft, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But the text forcefully corrects this. It clarifies that the true 5 toxins are entirely internal psychological states.
And they are greed, anger, infatuation, slander, and suspicion.
Greed, anger, infatuation, slander, and suspicion. And the psychology of why human beings mistranslated those concepts is so revealing. I mean, it is vastly easier to point at someone gambling or stealing and label them as toxic.
Oh, of course, because that requires no self-reflection.
Not at all. It is much harder to sit in a quiet room and admit that your own mind is clouded by, say, suspicion or infatuation.
Let's look at the causality of why those specific internal states act as dust on the spiritual mirror. Take infatuation, for example.
Okay.
When you are infatuated with a person or an idea or a goal, you are narrowing your entire reality down to a single hyper-idealized point.
You completely lose objectivity.
Exactly. You become blind to the flaws of that idea or the broader context surrounding it. And slander works similarly, but just in the negative direction.
Like a negative filter.
Right. When you engage in slander, you create a proactive filter of hostility. You warp your perception of another person to fit a negative narrative, which means you are no longer interacting with the reality of who they are.
You're just interacting with your own distorted projection of them.
Yes.
But, I mean, the cognitive load required to prevent those projections is massive. The text is asking for what Buddha called correct seeing, hearing, and thinking. To constantly police your own natural thoughts and filter out greed, anger, infatuation, slander, suspicion.
It's exhausting.
It's an exhausting amount of mental vigilance. And impartially speaking, we really have to ask if these traits are always actually poisons. I mean, a degree of suspicion is a functional defense mechanism against deception, isn't it? And a degree of anger is often the fuel required to correct a genuine injustice. It feels like the text is demanding the eradication of features that are just deeply embedded in human survival.
Well, the framework of the text views that very survival instinct as the anchor keeping us in the material realm.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, what feels like a functional defense mechanism to us is, in this author's view, the exact dust that blocks us from perceiving a higher truth. But Zhu Feng doesn't stop with the ancient 5 toxins.
Yeah, he adds one.
He does. He argues that in our modern, hyper-connected context, there is a specific additional toxin that urgently needs to be wiped from the mirror. He adds a 6th toxin, which is jealousy.
Jealousy. And the text provides a very precise, piercing definition of it, too.
Yeah.
It describes it as an inexplicable, indignant resentment, a taboo feeling arising from within, purely as a result of failing to obtain what others possess.
The operative word there is inexplicable.
Yeah.
The author is really highlighting the irrationality of the emotion. When a colleague gets a promotion or a neighbor buys a new car, their acquisition rarely impacts your material life in any direct way.
Usually not at all.
Right. Yet the internal reaction can be this visceral, burning resentment. And the text outlines a catastrophic chain reaction when this specific dust settles on the mind.
Yeah, the author writes that jealousy distorts the soul. It makes people create trouble out of nothing. It destroys peace and harmony, manufactures friction, and fundamentally sows discord.
It's incredibly destructive.
The text goes as far as to say that jealousy injures life, and that's life with a capital L, capital I, capital F, capital E, for no reason at all.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason jealousy is so destructive to spiritual perception is that it fundamentally distorts the real nature of matter.
How so?
Well, it leads people entirely astray because it generates a powerful hallucination. When you look at the person you are jealous of, you're no longer seeing a human being experiencing success.
Right.
The jealousy forces you to perceive their joy as a direct personal attack against your own worth.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of jealousy as an autoimmune disease of the spirit.
Okay, like that.
A healthy immune system is designed to identify and attack external threats to keep the body safe, right? But in an autoimmune disorder, the system misidentifies healthy, native cells as the enemy and begins destroying the body from the inside.
That is exactly how jealousy functions in the mind.
It attacks your own peace, your own contentment, simply because it misinterprets someone else's external reality as an internal threat to you.
And the tragedy of that hallucination is that the jealousy does virtually nothing to the person who possesses the object or the status. The entire destructive process is contained within the mind of the envious person. The text argues that this is the ultimate hoodwinking of the spiritual eye.
And we often go to great lengths to disguise this autoimmune response, don't we? Like, how often do we mask our own jealousy as righteous anger or a demand for justice?
Oh, constantly.
We convince ourselves we're critiquing a flawed system or calling out someone's undeserved privilege, failing to realize that our spiritual mirror is just heavily caked in the dust of our own envy.
To demonstrate just how violently jealousy blinds people and shuts down objective perception, Xue Feng uses a highly provocative case study. He points directly to his own life and makes a series of immense claims.
Immense is a good word for it.
Yeah.
The claims he makes in the text are vast, and we're relaying them purely impartially here to understand the mechanism he's highlighting, but Xue Feng states that he's the person with the highest wisdom.
Right.
He claims to be the greatest man in history. He writes that he is the messenger of the greatest creator and the incarnation of both Jesus Christ and Buddha.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back.
He also includes a note that many women are attracted to him.
Those are paradigm-shifting assertions about oneself, but the text doesn't dwell on proving them. It focuses entirely on the reaction those claims produce in the listener.
And what is that reaction?
Well, Xue Feng describes how, upon hearing these statements, people instantly become his enemies. He observes that they are filled with anger, hostility, and overwhelming indignation.
And his conclusion for why they react with such ferocity comes right back to the sixth toxin. He argues that the deepest root cause of their hostility is jealousy.
Right.
Because they are jealous of his stated status, his claimed wisdom, or the affection he receives, their ability to listen objectively completely collapses.
He says they listen with incorrect hearing.
Exactly. The text uses Buddha's concept of incorrect hearing, stating that the audience begins listening with a heart of evil. Because they're filtering his words through their own jealousy, they miss the whole forest because they are obsessing over a few trees.
And analyzing the psychological mechanism the author is highlighting here, it requires stepping back from the magnitude of his specific claims.
But regardless of what you think about his claims of divinity.
Exactly. Because the dynamic he describes is a verifiable human behavior. When our ego is threatened by someone else's grand claims, or when we feel a sudden spike of envy, our objective analytical skills just shut down.
We stop evaluating the actual substance of the argument.
We shift entirely into a defensive posture, reacting purely to our own bruised ego.
But, the text demands some pushback here.
Yeah.
If an individual walks up to you and casually claims to be the greatest human being in history and the literal incarnation of Buddha, the immediate reaction of most people would be skepticism.
Sure, naturally.
So the author dismisses the hostility as jealousy. But couldn't someone argue that their reaction is just a functional, rational nonsense detector firing off?
Right.
Is it truly always jealousy, or is the mind just rejecting a premise that defies standard logic?
Well, the framework of the text addresses that tension through the concept of the clean mirror. The argument is that if your spiritual eyes were truly open and your mirror was completely devoid of the 5 toxins and jealousy, you would be able to process Shui Feng's claims with perfect, unbothered clarity.
Unbothered being the key word.
Exactly. Skepticism can be calm and analytical. The text points out that the reaction he gets isn't calm calculation. It is anger, hostility, and ferocity.
I see.
According to the author's logic, if the claims were merely false, you would just see them as false and move on. The fact that the claims trigger a violent emotion response is, to him, the ultimate proof that the dust of jealousy and ego is present.
It's similar to the societal reaction when a deeply disruptive new artist or radically unconventional idea emerges. If the immediate visceral reaction of the public is to get angry and tear the artist down, we have to look at the root of that anger.
Exactly.
Is it because the art is genuinely devoid of merit, or is it because we secretly resent the artist's audacity to break the rules we've been strictly following? The anger is the smoke, and the text is suggesting that jealousy is the fire.
That's a great way to put it. And the author doesn't just diagnose this widespread blindness. He provides a specific structural solution for how to evolve past it.
Which brings us to Lifechanyuan.
Yes. He points to the building of Lifechanyuan as the ultimate method of self-refinery and self-cultivation.
And he introduces it using this very evocative landscape metaphor. Xu Feng states that he has intentionally created a path filled with steep mountains and tortuous rivers.
The metaphor is crucial for understanding the practical application here. These mountains and rivers, they're not physical locations. They are the intentional friction required for spiritual growth.
It's not supposed to be easy.
No, the text makes it clear that self-cultivation is not meant to be a passive, relaxing meditation. The obstacles are deliberately placed. The moment you feel that burning resentment when a coworker succeeds, that is the steep mountain.
And the urge to slander someone who slighted you, that's the tortuous river.
Exactly. And the stakes for navigating this landscape are absolute. The text argues that if you successfully scale these mountains and cross these rivers by actively dissecting and discarding your toxins, you reach the other side,
where you are rewarded with beautiful flowers and picturesque scenery, which represents achieving a higher order of life.
But if you fail, if you allow the jealousy and the anger to dictate your actions, you stay exactly where you are. You're trapped in transmigration, stuck in a stagnant cycle, repeating the same spiritual mistakes indefinitely.
So it reframes psychological friction entirely. The resistance you feel when you try to let go of your ego isn't a sign that you're failing. It's the exact mechanism of your salvation.
Right. You cannot restore the sensitivity of your spiritual perception without being subjected to the weight of those tests.
It basically casts Lifechanyuan as a spiritual obstacle course. When you walk into a gym and see heavy weights on the rack, you don't complain that the metal is too heavy.
No, you'd sound ridiculous.
Right. The heavy weight isn't there to oppress you. The resistance is the only thing that actually builds the muscle. If there were no steep mountains of conflict in our daily lives, there'd be no environment in which to prove that we've actually overcome our own jealousy.
This brings the entire philosophical framework back to a highly practical individual level. The text leaves the reader with a clear mandate. You must not let jealousy hoodwink the spiritual eyes, and you must take responsibility for wiping the dust off your own mirror regularly.
It forces a rather uncomfortable audit of our own internal landscapes, honestly. Like how many of the steep, impassable mountains in our own lives, the protracted conflicts at work, the falling outs with friends, the endless arguments online, how many of those are actually just our own unchecked jealousies blocking the view?
It is an incredibly demanding diagnostic to run on oneself. It's asking us to look past the external conflict and really examine our internal filtration system.
Well, we have covered massive ground today. We started with the text's assertion of a hidden sixth perception system, our spiritual eyes, designed to perceive objective truth in the non-material world.
We explored how the ancient five toxins greed, anger, infatuation, slander, and suspicion function not as physical vices, but as psychological dust that blinds that internal mirror.
We analyzed the destructive, reality-distorting hallucination caused by the modern toxin of jealousy. And finally, we examined the intentional obstacle course of self-refinery, where the heavy resistance of our own emotions is the very thing we must overcome to reach a higher order of life.
I think the core application of the text is a challenge to evaluate your own perception. For you listening, the invitation is to look at your interactions today and ask where the dust of resentment or infatuation is actively altering the reality you think you're seeing.
Absolutely. And as we conclude this diagnostic of the mind, there's one final angle to ponder. The text argues that our spiritual perception is a flawless baseline program, and that the complex, chaotic human emotions we experience, the sudden anger, the deep infatuation, the sharp pangs of jealousy, are nothing more than toxic dust meant to be systematically wiped away.
Right.
But imagine for a moment that you actually succeeded in that task. Imagine you managed to scrub the mirror completely clean of all greed, all suspicion, and every ounce of jealousy.
What would be left?
Exactly. If you removed all of those difficult, messy emotions, would you truly achieve a higher, perfect order of existence? Or, in eliminating all of that internal friction, would you lose the very texture and depth that makes the human experience so profoundly meaningful in the first place? Something to think about the next time you find yourself wishing the messy reality of being human was just a little easier to diagnose.